So hello, I'm Virgile Perret from the Observatoire de la Finance, and I'm glad to welcome you to our first Observatoire snapshot, which is on the recent developments of the French company Danone. To discuss this, I'm pleased to welcome Josina Kamerling, Head of Regulatory Outreach at CFA Institute, and Paul Dembinski, who is the Director of the Observatoire de la Finance and Professor at University of Fribourg. So before we start the conversation, I just would like to recall a few facts about what happened recently with Danone. So it was on March 15 this year, 2021, that Emmanuel Faber, the chairman and CEO of the French group Danone, was ousted by the board, which acted under pressure from activist shareholders. The departure of Faber, who joined the group in '97 and took over as CEO in 2014, marks the downfall of one of the most visible advocates for more responsible capitalism, in which companies do not only serve shareholders, but also protect the environment, their employees, and also their suppliers. So to understand this case, it is important to recall that since 2019, French law allows companies to take greater consideration of social and environmental issues through a new legal status, which is called entreprise à mission, or purpose-driven company. So Emmanuel Faber was very supportive of this French law, but he also managed to turn Danone into a purpose-driven company in 2020, so last year, with 99% of the shareholders approving the change. So in these circumstances, his departure has raised a debate and many questions. And I'm delighted to welcome Paul and Josina to debate this issue. So maybe I will start with a first question to you, Josina. Do you think it is an accident, I mean an isolated event, or does this event reveal a more general trend, for example, a split between supporters of sustainable capitalism and corporate activists?
Thank you very much, Virgile, and very happy to take part in this first video podcast. So at CFA Institute, we've been researching this for the last 7 odd years. And we already saw a trend following the revision of the Shareholders' Rights Directive back in 2014. We saw that there was a shift in terms of what institutional investors were perceiving as their role. There were some, for example, that were very conscious that they had a duty to other stakeholders. There were some that thought, no, it's just as a shareholder, and some that said, well, we're not sure, we'll watch this. So that is the perception of the shareholder. In the companies, the same action was taking place. The company was trying to put itself in the middle of this world, which was becoming sustainable, first of all through climate change, but then also through the E and the S of ESG. And it is interesting because this debate has been taken forward by groups like the European Parliament, which published a study on 4 different models of capitalism and what would be, what are the consequences if you go down one road or the other. So to the case of Danone, the action was laudable to become a purpose-driven company. But what you forget is that investors do want return, and you have to walk the talk. And they weren't seeing enough. There are many companies that show, sustainability can actually increase the shareholders' price because the company becomes more purposely, in tune with its environment. But in this case, it was talk and the walk was missing.
Okay, thank you very much, Josina, for these very interesting explanations. I think this would make a transition to another question to you, Paul. Do you think that, purpose-driven companies continue to be listed? Can they continue to be listed on the stock exchange? given that the shareholders base is fragmented and unstable. And as a result, not all shareholder sensitivities are represented on the board. So would the goals of ESG investment be better served by large non-listed companies?
I will pick up of what Josina said. Thank you very much for getting me here. I will pick up on this, walk the talk. Should the talk be walked or run? And I think here we have the question of time frame and time perspective. So possibly, but the scientific opinions diverge. ESG objectives can be attained in longer perspective when, of course, short-term results are interested for, let's say, the normal shareholder. So the question is, and there is this nice saying, doing well when doing good. So is it more than a dream? Can it really be achieved doing well while doing good? Can we really harmonize a potential conflict between this two-time perspective, the walk perspective, which is a slow movement, and the run perspective, which is the run of the activities that require activist investors? So if we go for the answer that is not so easy to reconcile, the two rhythms, the two time frames, the two horizons, then probably we could say that yes, maybe the fragmentation and the nervosity of stock markets is something that does not allow the companies, the boards, the CEOs to really develop a long-term strategy taking into account these ESG recommendations. So maybe there would be, let's say, left a little bit aside and quieter if they are not listed. But this not listing means that they have a strong nucleus of shareholders that are not going to desert the company because one quarter or one half-year report results do not match their expectations. So, of course, theoretically, I would say, do you have more perspective when you are not listed? That was the case of family companies for centuries. So they could develop their long-term strategy. But of course, it means that you have a stable base of shareholders, which is not necessarily given, taking into account that pension funds have also their reports, have also their financial requirements, and they need the possibility to divest when the bells are ringing.
And I would say to that, you need to take into account when you develop markets, a balance between private markets and public markets. We want a good balance of those. We don't want too many private markets taking over from the public markets, which is what's happening at the moment in the EU. And you want a diversified shareholder base. Where you both have retail investors and institutional investors. And it's the retail aspect that make it necessary to get this transparency going.
But if I may, just one point which seems important is the governance issue. How you adjust the board, which is by definition rather stable, and changing flow of shareholders who do not necessarily recognize each other as being ESG, because simply it's anonymity prevailing there. So you cannot easily have a pool of ESG investors that are aware of the fact that there might be an activist action going on, and they have to be present and make this, for instance, to manifest their support to the board or to the CEO, and not allow the activist mission to be successful.
Thank you very much for these insights, Paul and Josina. Very interesting. Maybe a final question to both of you. To a certain extent, you already mentioned some aspect that I think we could develop more. Are the short-term and long-term goals of the corporation, finally, are they really reconcilable, or do we need to reinvent the corporation? It's a more general question.
Maybe I can quote from the Edelman Trust Survey, which came out last week, the 2021 edition. The Edelman Trust Survey is an annual survey of society. And what we see in there is that companies are being trusted. to do what is right in this changing environment and in the pandemic, but also in the recovery, more so than governments. So the responsibility of a company is changing. That to saying, do we need to reinvent the corporation? I'm not sure, but I see this development. I think we have also to take into account different structures. So in the, let's say, the continental Europe, you have a supervisory board that is composed of external stakeholders, employee participation, that has control over the executive board. This you don't have in Anglo-Saxon governance culture. So I think we need to think very carefully, because you can't place an undue democratic responsibility on an entity that is there to have profit for its shareholders. And that is the first. We need to qualify what being a company means. I don't think in company law we have addressed this issue enough. And the changing purposes of a company is showing that need for requalifying it.
Thank you.
So if I may, I think that we often forget, we speak from the perspective of stock markets. And the companies that are listed on the stock markets, according to estimates, there are about 60 or 70,000 in the world, as compared with millions of enterprises that are present outside of the financial market. So when we speak about corporation, we focus on those, let's say, the colossus of our economy. And this colossus is more an exception than the rule. And of course, this colossus legal design is a fruit of evolution, but it has been invented and largely introduced about 150 years ago, in the middle of 19th century. So there should be, my opinion is, and the pandemic shows it also from the other perspective, that you have companies that have a systemic importance. As we have seen with the financial crisis, some banks were considered as being systemically important, and they have been regulated in a slightly different way from other ones. So I see a possibility for creating a category of colossus among the colossus that should be which have a systemic importance, be it in pharma, be it in telecoms, be it in transportation, etc., possibly also in food, that have this systemic importance and should be regulated in a slightly different way as a normal corporation listed, and totally different way from an SME that is a family enterprise and does not care on the daily value of the stocks. So there is a need to integrate in a legal framework the expectations and also the demands of civil society and also of some stakeholders. To invent a new form of corporation does not mean that one has to get rid of the others, but to introduce another one. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these explanations, Paul. Any reaction, Josina? Are we?
Yeah, I would say we come back to Danone, and I think, Paul, indeed, systemic important corporations, maybe we could think of that purpose-driven, the mission for the good of society, because I think that is important, and maybe that will be a distinguishing factor. And I think SMEs, they're also going to be taken into account to think of their surroundings, but in a different way, because they are, they're smaller and drive things, but by very nature of being family owned and being integrated in their region, they will need to take into account other stakeholders as well.
Well, thank you very much to both of you for these explanations. That's a very interesting discussion for this first snapshot of the Observatoire. And well, I'm looking forward to the next one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.